Unbelievable.
And you know, the nature of the evacuation, Zach, as you were speaking behind you, I saw a truck with a horse trailer. And this is the kind of situation where some of these areas are not easy to evacuate. You've got a lot of seniors in these areas, people with mobility issues. You've got large animals, small animals, and the roads are very narrow, and they just on any given day are very tight. Then you have an evacuation situation, and it's very tough going. So I'm going to take you through some maps. I'm going to take you through what we were looking at this morning and some of our major areas of concern. And while, you know, primarily I'm a meteorologist, I've been studying this for a while and looking at these areas. And this is a major situation of concern that we need more experts to come in and talk about this. I'm going to bring in Brandon Ritteman here, who has been spearheading all of our coverage for Firepower Money, talking about PG&E, wildfires in California, how they've changed, and the current state. So you've been to some of these areas, and I know it just looks like this on a map, but can you just describe for me what Grizzly Flats looks like, what Sly Park looks like, what Pollock Pines looks like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've been working on this, as you know, for 3 years, and part of the foundational reporting we've done is on the fire problem in general. Since you brought up PG&E, I want to be very clear, there is no reason to suspect utilities in this wildfire at this point. The cause is still completely under investigation. But we did go venture out into the Pollock Pines area for the very first season of Firepower Money 3 years ago to exemplify the fire problem. It is frankly a known quantity to fire crews as a dangerous place that is difficult to get out of, where trees and homes exist in very close proximity to one another. And that's why the concern today is this fire is south of there.
So what I'm going to do with Brandon here, I'm going to take you through image by image to show you the progression of this fire and why there's such a high concern for it. So this was the map that I showed early this morning on Morning Blend. This was the overnight satellite hotspots. Each little dot is where the satellite is detecting a hot fire. Now, what you can't tell from this is exactly what this is. Is this a campfire? Is this a controlled burn? Is this a burnout operation? Things like that. But what we know from the overnight hours is that this was an area of active wildfire. Now, in general, we're expecting the fire to grow off to the north and off to the east. So that's why I put that arrow on there this morning showing you the projected path. But remember, the winds change, and the big push this morning was off to the north. So again, this is the brand new imagery that came out from the satellites to show you all of the growth. And Brandon, you've covered a lot of fires over the years. To see this much growth in about 4 to 6 hours, what does that tell you about the nature of this fire?
Tells you it's extreme. And I mean, so they talk about critical fire behavior, the Forest Service did in their most recent update this morning, and that is what you're seeing. This is a fast-moving head of the fire. As you saw, the first graphic showed it down here. We've now covered all of this ground, and you can't even really see the name on the map, Grizzly Flats, because it's covered up. Neighborhoods, neighborhoods, neighborhoods right there. I'm very concerned for the morning these people went through.
So this is satellite imagery. This is just one way of looking at it. We have a number of other tools. Some of these are brand new. This is from a network of cameras supplied by PG&E and part of their ongoing effort to be part of the coverage of these fires. Now, this is the situation this morning. This is a still image. What you're looking at is low-lying smoke from the overnight fire, but also in the background right here, you see what we call a pyrocumulus cloud. That is literally a cloud created by hot fire underneath. Now, as you've been covering fires, Brandon, pyrocumulus cloud, what does that tell you about fire behavior, and also what do firefighters think and act when they see something like that?
So they train you when you go through wildland firefighter training to look for fires making their own weather. They can create, as you know, thunderstorms. What you have is basically the condensation billowing up from all the heat underneath it. And the problem is in the afternoon, these tend to build up really big and then collapse back down. And what that does is disperse wind in every direction when the weight of the cloud collapses in on itself. The fact that we had one of these going at 8 o'clock this morning is a big problem. And earlier this morning, I should say, you saw it up like this. It's kind of already had that collapse. That's an afternoon pattern, apparently, because the winds are now shearing sideways. So I hate to compare things to paradise before we've been in to see things on the ground, but the behavior of this column is reminiscent of what I remember seeing on the way up there this morning.
You know, one of the things too that we should point out, this kind of behavior is more apparent in the afternoon when it's hot, when it's dry, when the winds are typically the strongest. To see it this early in the morning, there is some comparison to the campfire because that was very surprising to see that kind of fire activity early in the morning. And another thing about that is some people may not be prepared to evacuate at 7, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning versus when they've been watching it all day.
You'd be in a position to talk about the weather a little bit more than I would, but I think just by looking outside, the one thing that we have going for us today that's better than the situation back in 2018 is the wind speed generally is not as fast as what we had the morning of the campfire.
Yeah, absolutely. 70, 80 mile per hour gusts for the campfire. This morning, what I observed through the network was anywhere between 20 to 25 miles per hour. Now, let me take you to the most concerning part that we saw this morning. This is why we're spending a lot of time talking about this, is you can layer different imagery behind what the satellite sees. The satellite's only going to see the hot spot. We layer the maps underneath. So this is roughly the community of Grizzly Flats, and you can see all this hot fire, all this hot active fire. What's difficult to see is that there's a bunch of roads through here, and there's a bunch of homes. Now, you've been to some of these communities. Again, can you describe how packed in some of these homes are within the vegetation?
Yeah, so in a second we'll show you some video just from north of here, but as you point out, you can see these sort of residential streets here. Where this fire is heading up in Pollock Pines, a few years ago we went out, we have this video from 2019 that I want to show you. This is a wall of trees so thick it's obscuring the neighborhood, but you're actually in this shot seeing hundreds of houses right now. You just can't see them unless you look straight down. And our drone's going to do that for you in a moment so you can see just how thick this is. That's what it looks like if you fly right over the houses. The vegetation is thick. You see problems like that roof covered in pine needles right there. The fact of the matter is, though, if you get a big sideways moving column through this kind of material, you can have done all of your defensible space, and that's not going to necessarily guarantee your safety on a day like this. If you've got a thick black column of smoke heading over your head, that is a time to get out. Don't wait for the embers the size of Duraflames to start landing on your roof and your deck.
Right, and that's that's another concern, is that with the campfire, it was actually the structures themselves became the ignition point for the next fire in the next home and down the way. So again, just taking it back to what we know about this fire in this area, once it gets up into what we call the crown of the tree, which is where all the pine needles are in these big pine trees, it doesn't matter what's going on in the ground. It moves very quickly because it finds the fuel that it needs, and it can progress miles at a time.
Well, and firefighters talk about ladder fuels, as you know, Rob. So that's, you have the pine needles on the ground to the little plants, to the bigger plants, to the trees. The homes become part of the ladder fuels in a situation like this. And that is why this particular area is a concern to firefighters and has been a known quantity for some time. It is one of the things people love about living in this part of Northern California is that you've got this wall of green, but it can be dangerous. And the thinning work to make it safe has been done, mostly around these communities, not necessarily in all of these communities. So it's a wide area of concern today.
Yes, we'll go ahead and go back to the maps again really quickly. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but this is roughly the same kind of terrain. So again, you saw the video, what it looks like from a drone.
That's Pollock Pines off Sly Park Road for anyone who was wondering.
So here's one final thing just to think about. The combination of heavy fuel, likely dangerous fire conditions that repeat itself often with dry, gusty winds, and also with a bunch of residents built into the whole terrain. The California Public Utilities Commission came up with a fire risk map a few years ago. They updated them in March, and they have different tiers. Where it's not colored, they're not too concerned. Yes, there could be fires, but there isn't an elevated or extreme risk. Then they have the next couple of tiers. You can see some of these communities. Their highest tier, and by the way, these maps became very well known for insurance claims, and a lot of people getting their insurance canceled or their premiums increased a lot, in part based on these maps due to the fire risk.
It's almost like the flood map, but for wildfire.
Exactly.
In California, yeah.
And as I was looking at this morning, Brandon, I noticed that Grizzly Flats is right in the middle of that.
Right in the red.
Where the fire has been moving this morning has been moving up towards Sly Park, which is right in this area. Pollock Pines, right off Highway 50, is in this area. As you move downhill, less vegetation, roads, different things, the risk category does go down, but where the fire is actively burning is a known high-risk area for fires and also the threat to homes and businesses.
Yeah, and as I've been saying since this morning, if you have loved ones in the area, whatever side of Highway 50 they're on, if you're talking in that Pollock Pines, that roughly part of that corridor, now is the time to think about getting out. You do not need to be waiting on an evacuation order, particularly if you have mobility issues in your family or among your friends and loved ones. So,
Yeah, so
just something to keep in mind.
If you've got friends or family in this area, the time to move is now. The time to take action is now, and really pay attention. This is a fast-moving, dangerous fire. Walt?